He built a life where emotions had no place and money solved everything, until the day he saw 4 little girls being thrown out of his own hotel, and one of them looked him straight in the eyes and said, "We don't have a home." Pause. Welcome to Black Struggles, where we dive into stories of unexpected redemption and hidden truths. Henry Brooks was never the kind of man to waste time. His life was mapped out in 15-minute increments. His phone rarely left his hand, and even his thoughts moved in the rhythm of quarterly goals and investment returns. He built his empire with sharp precision, and now standing at the top of a hotel chain that stretched across the country, he believed he had everything under control. That morning, dressed in his signature navy blue slacks, crisp white shirt, and matching tie, Henry arrived unannounced at one of his flagship hotels in the city. It was part of a routine he called field efficiency inspections. But everyone knew it was about fear. Staff hurried to stand straighter. Managers gave tight smiles. No one wanted to be the next to face his wrath, if anything was even slightly out of place. The sun was just beginning to reflect off the high glass walls of the lobby when he stepped out of the sleek black car and made his way toward the front entrance. But before he could even reach the doors, something strange caught his eye. A commotion near the revolving doors where a security guard stood waving his arms and scolding someone. As he got closer, Henry slowed. The guard was pointing toward the street, voice sharp, posture angry, and in front of him stood 4 little girls, 4 very small girls. They were standing in a tight cluster, barely reaching the height of his waist, each of them dressed in a simple worn cotton dress, a different color for each, soft pink, pale yellow, sky blue, and lavender. Their blonde hair was tangled from wind, and their faces were flushed with exhaustion or fear. He wasn't sure which. Pause. What secret could these girls hold that would change a millionaire's life forever? Stay tuned with Black Struggles to find out. One of them clutched a frayed stuffed animal. Another held onto her sister's hand so tightly their knuckles had gone white. The guard looked ready to shove them out the door. Henry stepped in without thinking, his voice quiet but firm. "What's going on here?" The guard hesitated, then straightened. "They've been sitting in the lobby for hours. They don't belong here. No adult, no reservation. I was told to clear the space." Henry ignored him and crouched down to the girl's level. He rarely bent for anyone, but something about them, their stillness, the quiet way they huddled together, held him there. He asked gently, "Where is your home?" One of the girls, the one in blue, looked up at him. Her eyes were large and brown, far too serious for her age. She didn't speak right away. Then she said with the tiniest shake of her head, "We don't have one." Pause. Could this moment be the turning point for a man who thought he had it all? Subscribe to Black Struggles for the full story. The words didn't hit him all at once. They landed slowly, as if his mind was trying to reject the implication, for small girls alone, homeless, standing outside his luxury hotel like shadows in a place built to shine. He glanced at the front desk where no one seemed to be moving to help them. Guests passed by without looking twice. He stood and said to the guard, "They're coming with me." The guard blinked, confused. "Sir." But Henry didn't explain. He motioned for the girls to follow, and without a word, they did. They trailed behind him quietly, stepping onto the marble floor as if unsure whether they were allowed. He led them to the sitting area in the corner of the lobby and told the nearest server to bring water, sandwiches, and blankets immediately. Then he sat with them, still in his perfect suit, with their tiny legs swinging over the edge of the chair, and for the first time in a long while, Henry Brooks stopped thinking about profit, loss, or control. He simply looked at them, for girls who had nowhere to go, and felt the silence in their eyes speak louder than anything he had ever heard. Henry sat with the 4 girls in the quiet corner of the hotel lobby, watching them eat with the kind of cautious hunger that suggested they weren't used to having food offered without consequence. The sandwiches were gone within minutes. The small water bottles emptied almost as quickly. None of them said much, though the youngest, he guessed her name was Lily from the way the others called to her, kept looking at him curiously between bites. She seemed fascinated by his tie, the silver watch on his wrist, even the way he sat. The others, Sophie in pink, Emma in lavender, and Grace in yellow, were more guarded. They stayed close to each other, responding to questions with nods or quick glances rather than words. But even in silence, their bond was obvious. They moved like a unit, pieces of one story that hadn't yet been told. Eventually, Henry asked the question that had been sitting heavily on his mind. "Where is your mother?" The oldest, Emma, looked up. Then her voice was quiet, almost mechanical. "She's in the hospital. She's been there a long time." Sophie added, "She was in a car crash. We were staying with our aunt." The pause that followed made Henry's skin tighten. Grace finished the thought. "She said she'd be back in an hour." That was 2 days ago. Henry felt something inside him go still. No one had come looking for them. No one had checked in. These girls had been abandoned, left to wait for someone who never returned until hotel security decided they didn't belong. And now they were sitting in front of him eating the first real food they'd had in days. He tried to keep his voice steady. "Do you know your mom's full name?" Lily piped up without hesitation, as if proud to know something the others didn't. "Hannah Roberts. She sings to us. She says that's why we have pretty names. Like in songs." He took out his phone and opened a private directory, quickly searching local hospitals. Within minutes, he found a patient listed under Hannah Roberts ICU, serious condition. No emergency contact listed. No one had claimed her. Henry sat back, absorbing the weight of it. She had once been the woman he thought he'd marry. That was 6 years ago. They had parted when their lives took different directions. He into ambition, she into something softer, more grounded. He hadn't heard from her since, hadn't tried to follow. And now here she was, unconscious in a hospital, and her daughters, his daughters, were sitting across from him, unaware of the storm that was about to unravel. He didn't say anything to them about it yet. Instead, he stood and spoke calmly to the hotel manager, arranging for a private suite on the top floor. The girls needed a bed, a bath, safety. Social services had been notified, but he made it clear they were not to remove the children until he had spoken directly with their case officer. The manager, wide-eyed and confused, nodded quickly and followed his instructions. When the girls saw the suite, their expressions changed. Lily squealed and ran to the window to look at the skyline. Sophie carefully folded a towel from the bathroom like it was made of gold. Emma and Grace sat on the edge of the bed, unsure if they were allowed to stay. Henry knelt down and looked at them evenly. "You can sleep here tonight. I'll be just down the hall. And tomorrow, I'll take you to see your mom." None of them asked who he was or why he cared. They didn't ask what would happen next. They simply nodded, as if something in them already trusted him more than they trusted the rest of the world. That night, for the first time in a decade, Henry didn't return to his penthouse. He stayed in a hotel suite with 4 sleeping children under the same roof. And as he sat in the dim hallway outside their door, keeping watch even when no one asked him to, he realized he wasn't thinking about stocks or deadlines or reports. He was thinking about how easily 4 little girls had changed the entire direction of his life, and how strange it felt to want nothing more than to be part of theirs. The next morning began earlier than usual for Henry. He hadn't slept much, and not because of the discomfort of the hotel armchair where he had dozed off, but because his mind wouldn't settle. Every time he closed his eyes, he saw the 4 girls, how they had eaten in silence, how they had clung to each other, how none of them had cried, even when talking about being left behind. That kind of stillness in children wasn't natural. It came from learning too early that no one would come if you cried. He stood quietly in the hallway outside their suite, not wanting to wake them too soon, but unable to walk away. When the door finally creaked open and Sophie peeked out with sleepy eyes, he smiled without meaning to and asked softly if they were hungry. She nodded once and disappeared back into the room. Breakfast was served in the suite, a mix of pancakes, fruit, and hot chocolate. The staff brought it up with an extra dose of kindness now that they understood the situation. The girls sat around the small table, still in oversized hotel bathrobes, laughing quietly as Lily tried to blow bubbles in her cocoa. Henry watched from a chair near the window, a strange calm settling over him. He had never once imagined himself in a room like this, not as a father figure or a protector. And yet everything about the scene felt like it fit. Not perfectly, but naturally, like a space in his life had always been waiting for them. After breakfast, he told the girls gently that they were going to see their mother. Their laughter quieted instantly, and a shift moved through the room. Emma looked at him sharply. "Is she awake?" He hesitated before answering. "Not yet, but the doctor said she's doing better." "I thought you'd want to see her anyway." None of them spoke, but Lily got up and took his hand. That was answer enough. The drive to the hospital was quiet. Henry had arranged for a private car and asked one of his assistants to handle all of his meetings indefinitely. He didn't know how long this situation would stretch. And for once, he didn't care. Work could wait. These children couldn't. At the hospital, a nurse greeted them kindly and led them to the ICU waiting area. The girls huddled close together on one bench while Henry spoke to the doctor. Hannah Roberts was stable, but still unconscious. She had suffered multiple internal injuries and a traumatic head injury. The fact that she had survived was already considered a medical triumph. When Henry asked if she would wake up, the doctor gave a careful, non-committal answer. "There's hope," he said. And sometimes, especially with cases like hers, the presence of familiar voices can help. Henry returned to the waiting area and told the girls they could go in, one at a time. Emma went first. She held her mother's hand without speaking, just stared at her, and then leaned in to whisper something no one else could hear. Sophie went next, sitting by the bedside with a kind of still reverence, as if afraid any sound would break their mother more. Grace brought a drawing she'd made at the hotel, tucking it under her mom's pillow without saying a word. And Lily, the last to go, crawled gently onto the edge of the bed, lay down beside her mother, and whispered, "I missed you the most." After they left the room, the girls stayed curled up together on the waiting room couch, worn out by the weight of seeing someone they loved in such a fragile state. Henry spoke to the social worker assigned to the case and requested emergency custody, citing that he was both a legal guardian and someone with the ability to provide full-time care and stability. The woman was skeptical at first. Wealthy men didn't typically volunteer for responsibilities like this. But after seeing how the girls leaned into him and how he spoke about them, she promised to push the paperwork through faster than usual. That night, back at the hotel, Henry helped them get ready for bed. He read them a story poorly, with the wrong voices and no rhythm, but they laughed anyway. When the lights were off and they were all tucked in, Emma asked him, "Are you going to leave, too?" The room went quiet. Henry walked over and sat on the edge of the bed. "No," he said. "Not now. Not ever if you'll let me stay." She didn't reply, but she didn't look away either. And when he stood up, she grabbed his hand and didn't let go for a long time. That night, as the city blinked outside the tall hotel windows, and 4 girls slept soundly in a room that felt safer than anywhere they'd been in months, Henry Brooks finally admitted something to himself. His life before them had been full but not meaningful. His money had built empires, but these girls, without asking for anything, were quietly teaching him how to build a heart. By the end of the week, Henry had memorized the sound of each of the girls' footsteps. He could tell when Lily was coming by the soft, skipping rhythm of her little feet and how she always hummed when she walked. Grace moved more carefully, as if afraid she might break something she couldn't fix. Sophie was usually quiet but fast, especially in the mornings, and Emma, ever the oldest, even if only by minutes, had a deliberate, almost protective stride that made her seem older than 5. These details lodged themselves into Henry's mind without effort, like the way a father learns his children without ever deciding to. It wasn't intentional. It just became true. The temporary suite he had arranged for them at the hotel was beginning to feel like home. Despite its formality, the girls had drawn pictures that now lined the walls, crayon portraits and hearts taped beside expensive light fixtures. Their shoes cluttered the entrance, and stuffed animals lined the edges of the beds. Henry no longer flinched when things were out of place. He didn't notice the smudges on the mirror or the fingerprints on the coffee table. He noticed the way Grace's face lit up when she managed to tie her shoes alone, the way Sophie tucked a blanket around her sisters every night, and how Lily always asked if she could sit on his lap when he read to them. He kept his phone on silent now, only checking messages once or twice a day. His executive team had grown used to the new version of him, the one who no longer barked orders or demanded midnight updates. His assistants sent polite daily summaries, which Henry usually skimmed and then ignored. Business still moved, but the urgency had disappeared. He had spent his entire career convincing himself that money was the only measure of value. Now he couldn't imagine anything more valuable than brushing knots out of 4 little heads of hair each morning. Hannah remained unconscious, though her condition stabilized. The doctors were cautiously hopeful. Henry brought the girls to visit her every other day, letting them sit by her side, talk, sing, and draw quietly on notepads while he sat across the room. It was never easy. Emma always kept her hand on her mother's like she was holding her in place with sheer will. Lily brought her little drawings and tucked them beneath the edge of the pillow. Sophie whispered stories. Grace cried only once silently when she thought no one was looking. Henry did see, but he didn't say a word. He simply handed her a tissue and sat beside her until the moment passed. Outside of the hospital, life began taking on its own rhythm. Henry started waking up early to prepare breakfast himself. His first attempts were terrible: burned toast, runny eggs, but the girls were gracious. One morning, when he managed to get the pancakes just right, Lily clapped like he had won a trophy. They began taking short walks in the park nearby, the girls chasing pigeons or gathering sticks and pretending they were magic wands. Henry never rushed them. He carried Lily when she got tired. He let Sophie hold his hand without asking why. He bought Emma a small notebook after she said she liked to write big thoughts, and he sat beside Grace while she colored in absolute silence, the two of them saying nothing and everything at once. One evening, while the girls were watching a cartoon and Henry was cleaning up from dinner, Emma came into the kitchen. She hesitated for a moment, then asked, "Do you know my mom?" Her voice was soft but steady. He turned and faced her. "I did," he said. "A long time ago." She nodded. She always said, "You were the only person who ever really listened to her." Henry felt something deep inside him catch. He knelt so they were eye level. "I want to listen now," he said. "I want to be here for all of you." Emma reached forward and hugged him. It was not a polite hug or a brief gesture. It was full, strong, and trusting. He wrapped his arms around her, realizing that this, more than anything else, was what he had been waiting for his entire life. Not power, not control, just this, being needed by someone who still believed people could come back and be better. And in that quiet hotel kitchen, with the smell of syrup still in the air and the sound of cartoons in the background, Henry understood something he'd never felt before. He wasn't just a man helping children. He was part of them now. And they were becoming part of him. Henry hadn't expected the hospital to call that morning. He was sitting at the small kitchen table in the hotel suite, helping Sophie pour cereal without spilling milk on the counter when his phone vibrated against the wood. Normally, he ignored calls during breakfast, but something made him glance at the screen. When he saw the name of the hospital, his heart skipped a beat. He excused himself quietly, stepping into the hallway to take the call. And the moment the nurse said Hannah's name and the word responsive in the same sentence, he had to lean against the wall to steady himself. She wasn't awake fully, but she was breathing on her own. She had squeezed a nurse's hand when asked. It was progress. Real, undeniable progress. He returned to the suite with a calm face, not wanting to get the girls' hopes up too high. But when Lily asked if they were going to see Mommy today and he nodded, they erupted into excitement as if they had all heard the call themselves. That afternoon, he took them back to the hospital. The moment they entered the room, something was different. The machines were still there, still beeping, but the atmosphere felt less sterile. There was color on the table from drawings the girls had left earlier. The blinds were open slightly. Hannah's head turned slightly toward the door as they entered. Emma approached first and took her mother's hand again. "Mommy," she said, her voice small but clear. And this time, for the first time in what felt like forever, Hannah's eyelids fluttered. Her mouth didn't move, but her fingers twitched and her eyes, glazed and unfocused, opened just enough to make Emma gasp. The girls stood still, almost afraid to believe it until the nurse confirmed that Hannah was indeed regaining consciousness. Sophie began to cry. Grace hugged Lily so tightly it made the younger girl giggle through her own tears. Henry stood near the door, his chest tight, watching the impossible begin to unfold. Over the next few days, Hannah's recovery accelerated. She couldn't speak at first. Her throat was too weak. her body still recovering, but she was present. She looked at each of her daughters with recognition, her eyes filling with tears as they talked to her, telling her everything she had missed. They brought her their newest drawings, combed her hair gently, and held her hands while singing quiet songs at her bedside. Henry stayed mostly in the background, letting the girls reconnect with their mother. But each time Hannah looked at him, there was something in her expression: gratitude, confusion, maybe both. Eventually, she asked for him alone. The nurse gave them a few minutes of privacy. Henry pulled a chair to the side of her bed and sat, feeling the weight of 6 years fall onto his shoulders all at once. Hannah's voice was raspy but steady. "They're safe," she said, her first full sentence to him. He nodded. "They are." She looked at him, and for a long time neither of them spoke. Then she asked, "Why are you here?" He didn't answer right away. Then, with a quiet kind of honesty that surprised even himself, he said, "Because I didn't know they existed. And once I did, I couldn't not be." Hannah closed her eyes for a moment, tears slipping down her cheeks. "I didn't want to interrupt your life. I thought maybe it was better this way." Henry leaned forward, speaking gently. "Better for who?" "For me, maybe. But not for them. And not for you." She looked at him again, more steadily this time. "You stayed," she said. "All this time," he nodded. "Every day." She turned her head slightly toward the window, the sunlight spilling across her face. "They love you already," she whispered. "I can tell. They trust you." He didn't know what to say to that, so he didn't try to fill the silence. Instead, he took her hand and held it, not tightly, just enough to remind her that she wasn't alone anymore. That night, when they returned to the hotel, the girls ran ahead into the suite, talking over each other about what color they wanted their new beds to be when Mommy came home. Henry stood at the door and watched them, something shifting deep in his chest. This was no longer a temporary arrangement. He wasn't just helping. He was part of their family. And whether or not he had planned for it, he wanted to stay for the rest. The hotel suite had transformed into something that barely resembled its original purpose. It was no longer a temporary shelter, but a lived-in, warm space filled with signs of family life: soft toys on the couch, drawings taped to the glass balcony door, shoes scattered by the entrance, and the smell of warm oatmeal every morning. Henry had started waking up before the girls so he could have breakfast ready when they stumbled out of bed, their hair tousled, their eyes still adjusting to the light. It was a rhythm now, not born out of duty, but choice, and each moment they spent together continued stitching him closer to them. Hannah's condition improved rapidly. The doctors were cautiously optimistic about her long-term recovery, though she would need time, therapy, and rest. The girls visited her every other day, while Henry handled their schedules in between school enrollment paperwork, doctor's checkups, and, to his own surprise, a growing list of bedtime story preferences. They had already outgrown the suite. And one afternoon, while Lily napped and the others played with markers on the floor, he opened his laptop and began searching for a place, something more permanent, not just for them, for all of them. One morning, Henry brought Hannah a small bouquet of flowers and sat with her near the hospital window. She looked stronger now, her voice firmer, her color back. The nurse had just helped her walk down the hallway for the first time in months. When she returned to the bed, Henry had been waiting. She smiled at him, more at ease than she had been in their earlier tentative conversations. They talked for an hour, not just about the girls, about the time they lost, about the versions of themselves they'd become, about how neither of them had imagined being in this place. But somehow it felt more real than anything they had before. Henry didn't pressure her about decisions. He never asked where she would go or what she would do once discharged. Instead, he made it clear through presence, not promises, that she didn't have to decide anything alone. That evening, back at the suite, Sophie asked him if their mom would come live with them again. Henry bent down and answered honestly, "I hope so. But we'll only ask her if she wants that, too." The girls didn't push. They accepted that answer the way children do when trust has been earned, not by words, but by consistency. When Hannah was finally discharged, Henry brought her to the hotel himself. The girls had decorated the suite with balloons and hand-drawn welcome signs. Emma had folded a paper crown that she placed on her mom's head as soon as she walked in. Grace ran to the kitchen to offer her the cookies they had made that morning, slightly burnt, but filled with pride. Lily took her mother's hand and whispered, "It's better when you're here." That night, when the girls had gone to bed and the suite was finally quiet, Hannah and Henry sat on the couch in the soft glow of a nearby lamp. She looked around the space and said, "You made this feel like home." He looked at her and replied, "No, they did. I just followed their lead." She was quiet for a long time after that, her fingers tracing the rim of a mug of tea. Then softly, she asked, "Do you ever regret not knowing them sooner?" He didn't even hesitate every day. "But I'm grateful I know them now. And I'm not going anywhere." She smiled and leaned her head against his shoulder. And in that stillness, Henry felt something he hadn't known he'd been missing. Not just belonging, not just love, but the quiet certainty that he was exactly where he was meant to be. The decision to move into a real home came gradually, not from a single conversation, but from the way things began to grow out of the space they were in. The hotel suite, while once a safe haven, had become too small for the life that now filled it. The girls needed bedrooms of their own, places for their clothes and books, and secret collections of shiny objects and crayon masterpieces. Henry noticed the shift one afternoon when Lily asked if they would always live in the room with the fancy lamps and Grace asked if they could have a backyard. That night, after they were asleep, Henry brought it up with Hannah. They sat in the corner of the suite with the lights dimmed low and the city beyond the window glowing in amber and gold. Henry showed her listings on his laptop, houses in quiet neighborhoods with schools nearby, parks within walking distance, and kitchens that looked like they belonged to people who cooked more than they ordered out. Hannah listened, her expression unreadable at first, then slowly began leaning in, asking questions about window light and bathtubs, and whether one of the bedrooms had space for bunk beds. She didn't say yes immediately, but she didn't say no either. That Henry knew was the beginning of something. Within a week they found the house. It wasn't the largest or most luxurious, but it had warmth, wide porches, old trees, and a crooked path of stepping stones leading to a garden that begged to be rediscovered. The moment the girls stepped inside, they scattered in different directions, claiming corners and dreaming aloud. Emma stood in the hallway and said it smelled like cinnamon. Sophie found a window nook and declared it her reading spot. Grace asked if they could paint her room yellow. Lily ran into the backyard and shouted that they finally had grass. Henry moved them in himself, refusing to hire a team. He carried boxes, assembled beds, hung pictures drawn in crayon with tape, and set up nightlights in every room just in case. Hannah arrived a few days later after finishing her final checkup. She didn't bring much, just a single suitcase and a bundle of framed photos. But when she walked through the door and saw her daughters dancing barefoot in the living room, she paused for a long moment, her hand on the frame as if anchoring herself to reality. Then she stepped inside. Their first dinner in the house wasn't fancy. It was spaghetti with garlic bread in juice boxes because the dishes were still packed and the blender didn't work. But it was perfect. They sat on the floor around a borrowed table, laughing and leaning into each other, surrounded by boxes and the sound of something that had been missing for a long time: peace. After dinner, the girls helped clean up, placing their plates in the sink and racing upstairs to brush their teeth in their new bathroom. When Henry came up to say goodnight, he found Lily already curled under her blanket, her bunny tucked close to her chest. "Do we stay here forever now?" she asked. He knelt beside her, brushing her hair back from her forehead. "If you want to," he said. She nodded once and closed her eyes. Downstairs, Hannah was folding a pile of clean towels and placing them in the linen closet. When Henry came down, she smiled at him without speaking. There was nothing left to explain. They had built something fragile and real from the pieces of something once broken. And though they didn't know what every day would look like, they knew this: they were no longer moving through life separately. They were a family and they were home. The morning of the girl's 6th birthday arrived with the kind of quiet excitement that always precedes something magical. The house was still and peaceful just before sunrise, but Henry was already awake. He stood in the kitchen barefoot and in an old t-shirt, carefully lighting 6 little candles on 3 small cakes he had picked up the night before, one for each pair of twins who had somehow become the center of his universe. The kitchen smelled faintly of vanilla and strawberries, and the sky outside was just beginning to lighten, brushing the windows with soft gold. Hannah joined him a few minutes later, her hair pulled up and her hands still warm from sleep. She didn't speak at first. She just leaned against the counter beside him, smiling as he concentrated on balancing the candles so they wouldn't tip over. They had planned a small party in the backyard that afternoon, just the 6 of them and a few neighbors they had begun to trust. There would be balloons and a paper crown for each girl and a table full of messy homemade decorations they'd worked on for the past week. But the morning belonged to the family. One by one, the girls woke up and padded down the stairs in their pajamas, eyes still puffy from sleep, but lighting up the moment they saw the cakes. Lily squealed first, followed by Grace, and then Sophie and Emma, who tried to act more grown up, but were clearly just as excited. Henry didn't say much. He didn't need to. He just smiled and knelt beside the table, gesturing for them to make a wish before they blew out their candles. They closed their eyes with all the sincerity only children could offer, their faces serious, their little fingers laced together. When they opened their eyes again and blew out the flames, Henry clapped softly, and Hannah kissed the top of each of their heads. After breakfast, the girls scattered throughout the house with new art supplies and books while Henry and Hannah set up the yard. There were ribbons tied to tree branches, folding chairs covered with hand-drawn name tags, and a makeshift stage made out of wooden crates for Lily's birthday performance, which she had been rehearsing in secret. When the party began, it was everything Henry never knew he wanted: simple, full of laughter, and touched by a kind of joy that couldn't be bought or staged. The girls sang songs, played games, and at one point performed a short skit that involved a confused prince, a dancing dragon, and a lot of improvised dialogue. He laughed until he cried. As the sun began to dip low in the sky and the yard filled with the warm glow of string lights, Henry stood beside Hannah, watching the girls chase bubbles through the grass. He thought about who he had been just months ago, the man who believed love was a distraction, that vulnerability was weakness, that success came only from control. That man had been powerful but hollow. This man standing here in a backyard with frosting on his shirt and paint smudges on his arm felt more whole than he ever had in his life. Hannah turned to him and took his hand. And in the quiet between them, she said something that made his heart feel both heavy and light. "They don't just need you, Henry. They chose you every single day." He looked at her, at the girls, at the life they had built from almost nothing, and realized she was right. He hadn't forced his way in. He had been invited. And now he was staying. That night, after the girls had fallen asleep in a pile of blankets and birthday cards, Henry sat with Hannah on the back porch. They didn't speak for a long time. They just watched the moon rise and the house behind them hum with the soft sound of family. When he finally turned to her and asked, "So, what comes next?" she smiled and said, "Whatever we choose." And in that moment, under a sky full of stars and a heart full of everything he never thought he'd find, Henry knew that this was not the end of their story. It was the beginning. Pause. Thank you for joining us on Black Struggles for this powerful journey of transformation and family. If this touched your heart, hit that like button, share it with someone who needs to hear it, and subscribe for more stories that inspire and uplift.